Welcome to today's explainer. We are about to go on a pretty intense inward-looking journey to completely dismantle the myths society has fed us about love, attachment, and human connection. It is just so easy to fall into the trap of accepting culturally inherited definitions of what a relationship should look like. But today, we're stripping away all that noise to get to the raw truth of how we connect with others, and honestly, more importantly, how we connect with ourselves. So let's start by challenging literally everything you think you know. Is what we call love actually true love, or is it just a convenient contract where we trade comforts? We toss the word love around so carelessly, don't we? We say we love someone because they make us feel good or because they fulfill a specific need. But if we look really closely, we have to consider if this is just a transaction. You give me happiness and I'll give you happiness. True love isn't defined by how comfortable it makes us. In fact, real love can sometimes be incredibly uncomfortable because it's fundamentally about helping another person grow, become more independent, and reach their absolute highest potential. All right, Chapter 1, Love or Attachment. Let's dive right into our first major deconstruction. We confuse these two constantly, and it is the root of so much unnecessary pain. Attachment is driven entirely by fear, specifically the fear of losing someone. It makes us want to hold the other person captive in a cage, restricting their choices because we think their freedom is somehow a threat to us. But love is the exact opposite. Love wants to liberate. It's about helping someone fly. If you truly love someone, you don't bind them to you, you empower them. The source material makes a profoundly important point here. Love isn't just a fleeting feeling or some magical spark you're randomly born with. It's a perspective. It is a conscious lens through which you view another person as an independent, thinking consciousness, not an object meant for your gratification. And because it's a perspective, it means love is actually a skill. It has to be learned, trained, and practiced every single day, almost like a muscle you need to build over time. So the next time you feel the urge to, say, check your partner's phone, or you feel a sudden burst of panic when they go out without you, you absolutely must pause and ask yourself, are you acting out of love, or is your own deep-seated insecurity just desperately seeking a lifeline? If your actions are meant to soothe your own fears at the expense of your partner's freedom, that is not love. Moving right along to Chapter 2, Relationships, Family, and Freedom. Let's expand outward from romantic entanglements and explore how these illusions infect our families, our marriages, and our very sense of personal freedom. When marriage is treated merely as a social institution, people get reduced to rigid roles, like the provider or the homemaker. And when we get trapped in these roles, the actual human beings disappear. A real partnership, however, is simply two conscious humans choosing each other daily, not out of legal obligation and definitely not out of a fear of being alone, but out of genuine mutual growth. There are these cultural traps everywhere that force us into living lives governed by fear rather than freedom. Think about it. How many people abandon their true paths because of the fear of what will people say? How often do we confuse our parents' valuable advice with absolute orders, completely forgetting that we're adults with a right to our own lives? Having children should be a deeply conscious decision to raise a new, empowered human, not just blindly following tradition. And finally, when a home becomes a battlefield over these societal expectations, it just drains the energy required for any real personal growth. Society often feeds us this line that to be committed, we have to sacrifice our independence. But that is a false commitment. True commitment is about actively expanding your partner's freedom. If a relationship makes you smaller, more fearful, or hesitant to speak your mind, it is failing you, no matter how long you've been together. Okay, Chapter 3, Jealousy, Facade, and Consciousness. Let's transition to the darker side of relationships and confront some pretty ugly truths about jealousy, ownership, and the masks we wear to please others. We constantly romanticize toxic behavior in our culture. Just look at almost any romantic comedy from the early 2000s, where obsessive behavior is portrayed as charming dedication. But if someone is burning with jealousy, does it actually mean they care deeply about you? We often hear things like, oh, they're so jealous because they love me so much. It is time to aggressively tear this idea down. Jealousy is not a sign of love. It is an act of violence. It is control stemming entirely from our own deep-seated insecurities. The desire to say, "You are only mine," might sound romantic in a movie, but in reality, it's a flat-out refusal to accept the other person's independent consciousness. Where there's immense trust and openness, there is simply no need for control. For centuries, society has reduced women to mere bodies, valuing them purely for beauty, fertility, or utility. But true freedom requires a radical shift in perspective. We have to start seeing everyone as a genderless, independent, thinking consciousness. Physical bodies obviously differ, but the capacity to think, understand, and make decisions has absolutely no gender. And crucially, this shift requires men to also become awakened, thoughtful individuals. You cannot recognize a woman as pure consciousness if you aren't operating at that level yourself. So many relationships begin with us putting our best, most polished selves forward. And then, when the honeymoon phase ends and the mask slips, we inevitably hear, "You've changed." But the truth is, you haven't changed at all. You've just stopped pretending. True intimacy isn't just physical closeness. It's the bravery to drop the mask entirely. It's showing your deepest flaws and having your partner say, "I see this, and we're going to work on it together." Which brings us to Chapter 4, Loneliness versus Solitude. This is a critical junction. It's all about how our relationship with ourself fundamentally dictates our relationships with others. We often stay in terrible relationships simply because we are completely terrified of being alone. But we're confusing loneliness with solitude here. Loneliness is a desperate void. It's this agonizing lack of someone else. Solitude, on the other hand, is the rich, fulfilling experience of being at peace with yourself. It is a presence, not an absence. Once we master solitude, our entire reality shifts. We stop entering relationships just because we're scared of the dark, or because we desperately need someone to fix our lives. We change our entire dynamic from desperation to conscious choice. We choose a partner because they genuinely enrich our lives, not because we literally need them to survive. The ultimate freedom comes when you realize this. The person who has truly tasted their own solitude doesn't feel the immediate burning need for someone else's presence. When you've tasted the peace of your own company, you are completely liberated from that desperate clinginess that destroys so many relationships. And finally, Chapter 5, Knowing Oneself. For our last section, we're stripping everything back to the absolute foundation, the self, and the invisible enemy that ruins it all. We absolutely have to address the root of all relationship complexities, the deeply hidden ego. Every single time you feel severely underappreciated, unheard, or disrespected in a relationship, the source argues that it's your ego reacting. It is the core generator of all that bitterness. And ego brilliantly disguises itself, too. It doesn't always look like arrogant boasting. Often, it looks like sacrifice. When you find yourself keeping a mental ledger, saying things like, "I did the dishes all week, so you owe me," or demanding the respect you think you're owed, that isn't love speaking. That is the ego, loud and clear. If you are keeping score of what you've done for a loved one and demanding a return on your investment, it's ego, and it will eventually cause immense resentment. True sacrifice, on the other hand, keeps absolutely no score. It's pure giving without expectation, and that right there is what creates deep, unbreakable connection. We usually think of self-reliance as having your own bank account and financial independence. Well, that's obviously necessary. True self-reliance is having a mind entirely free from the slavery of societal expectations. You can be perfectly financially independent, but still make every single life decision based on seeking your family's or society's approval. Inner freedom is the ultimate goal here. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. The quality of our connections doesn't actually start when we meet someone. It starts the exact moment we begin to understand ourselves. Knowing that you cannot truly love another person without first conquering your own fears, dropping your ego, and finding peace in your own solitude, where will your journey begin today?